from Indore, Asian Institute of Ear, Nose and Throat. She's my senior from my fellowship. I'm really happy to introduce you people to her because she did her MS from KLE Belgaum. After that, she got trained in rhinoplasty from Dr. Virendra Gaisas. Before going there, she was there with Dr. Narayan Janikram, where I was her junior. And after training at Dr. Virendra Gaisar, she went to Dr. Gubish to get trained in rhinoplasty further. And we are very happy to welcome her on board. She'll be presenting the rhinoplasty masterclass, and it is a series of around 5 classes. We will get a full idea about rhinoplasty, and we can venture into that. Welcome, ma'am, and we can start, ma'am.
Thank you, Kishore, for the kind words. I'll just put this on slideshow and then we can start. Yeah. So, good evening, friends and colleagues. I would firstly like to thank Dr. Kishore and Dr. Sri Harsha, the masterminds behind the masterclass. And I'm really thankful to them to have given me the opportunity to share my experience with rhinoplasty with all of you. Like Dr. Kishore said, we'll be having a rhinoplasty masterclass series of 5 lectures in which we'll be covering all the basic aspects of rhinoplasty. We are starting the first lecture with relevant surgical anatomy related to rhinoplasty. And subsequent topics will be, of course, analysis, deviated noses, augmentation reduction, and complications in rhinoplasty. So I am Dr. Hina Bakshi. I belong to Indore. Indore is a city in the heart of our country, India. I work at Asian Center for ENT, which is a small daycare setup for all ear, nose, throat related problems. I exclusively practice rhinoplasty. So I started my career in the field of rhinoplasty after my training with the stalwart Dr. Narayan Jankiram. And from there, I could get the opportunity to get trained under Dr. Virendra Gaisar, who is known as the Indian master of rhinoplasty. And from there, like Dr. Kishore told you, I have been to Germany to Professor Gubish and Dr. Hack, where I observed their advanced techniques and could achieve finesse. So as we all know, India is a country of vast ethnic variations. As we see from north to south, the entire ethnic characteristics change. This has definitely been due to a random genetic drift, but the climatic factors also have quite a lot of role to play in this, especially the temperature and the humidity. So as we see observe the population up north, we would see that they have more slender noses, more tented noses, narrower noses. So why is it so? It is mainly because it is believed that they have more colder climate out there. So to regulate the airflow, the cold air airflow, the body has evolved so that they have narrower slit-like nostrils and a higher nose or a higher dorsum, which enables more humidification and more temperature regulation to the air that enters. Whereas in contrast, if we see the South Indian population, we'll see that they have more wider ala and flat noses. So this again enables them for temperature and humidity control. And so that is how we have seen that there's a lot of variation. If we see the East Indian population, again, you will see smaller, flatter noses with wider intercanthal distance. And in the West, again, we'll see a little bit of flatter and broader noses with thick skin, thick sebaceous skin. So why did I mention this here? The importance of this would be that many of you practice in various parts of the countries. So one must always keep in mind the ethnic characteristics of that patient. If a patient from south part of India with very thick skin, oily skin, sebaceous skin wants a very fine, refined tip like somebody like Hrithik Roshan maybe, so that is not possible. So one has to give very realistic expectations to the patients only, and that is only possible once we as surgeons realize the ethnic variations and characteristics and the limitations of the same. So despite the numerous ethnic variations, what does a patient demand? The patient demands a harmonious nasal proportion. And these should be our and the patient's aesthetic goals. They should match. The importance of anatomy, what I believe is you should be able to visualize anatomy in every step. So this starts pre-operatively where you make precise goals, precise anatomic goals pre-operatively itself. You create an adequate anatomical exposure of the nasal deformity while dissection. While doing any of the techniques to modify the nasal shape, you preserve and restore the normal anatomy. The trend is more towards structural rhinoplasty these days, and one must really strive to preserve the structure of the nose. Next would be always correct the deformities in an incremental control. One must not be radical to remove a lot of tissue, to remove a lot of cartilage. You should always do it incrementally, keep checking and doing it so that you preserve the anatomy as much as possible. And the last but the most important part is that one has to concentrate. Being an ENT surgeon myself, my main aim is always to restore the nasal airway, to maintain the nasal airway, and create no compromise in that area. So there'll be different terms that people keep using with respect to nose. So the usual terms, that is superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, are usually in the horizontal and vertical plane. Here things go a little oblique as the nasal orientation is so. So towards the eye or towards the forehead, the structures would be cephalic. Towards the tip of the nose or towards the lip would be caudal. Structures more towards the more towards the dorsum of the nose or towards the anterior part of the nose is dorsal, would be referred to as dorsal, whereas the base of the nose will be referred to as basal. And with respect to medial and lateral, the nomenclature remains the same. Medial is more towards the midline and lateral is away. So coming to the surface anatomy. The surface anatomy is important because ultimately it is all about the surface aesthetics. Whatever you do, whatever you modify with the framework ultimately affects the surface aesthetics, and that is where one has to be very cautious about all these terms and these aesthetic subunits. Why are these aesthetic subunits, why some of them look so prominent and some of them look flat, some of them look sharp and some of them look dull? It is all because of the underlying framework. Now, when we usually take photographs, there is an interplay of various shadows and light reflections. And due to the prominence of these structures, we can see them differently. We can see these shadows differently, and these add to the aesthetics of the nose. So in the frontal view, in the middle picture, as you can see here, just I'll start the pointer. Sorry. Yeah. So in this middle picture, you can see the topmost portion is the radix. Now, how do we define the radix? So radix is the portion of the nose or is the junction of the frontal bones which come from the top superiorly and the dorsum. This is mainly comprising of the nasal process of the frontal bone and the junction between the nasal process of the frontal bone and the two paired nasal bones. Coming down is the dorsum. Dorsum is the area where the two lateral surfaces of the upper two-third of the nose meet in the midline. Superiorly, it is continuous with the radix, and down below comes the tip. Just below the dorsum comes the tip. So what is the tip? Tip is also defined as apex of the lobule, lobule being the lower one-third mobile part of the nose. And tip is the most prominent part of our nose. Coming down is just above the tip and below the dorsum is the supratip, which can be better appreciated in this lateral profile view. This supratip area has a mild depression, which is usually aesthetically pleasant in cases of a female characteristic nose. In males, they prefer this area to be a little bit fuller and to have a more fuller and straight dorsum rather than any irregularities in the supratip area. This area, of course, is inferior to the dorsum and superior to the tip. Next comes in the lateral view, the columella, this hanging part below the nostrils. This columella basically divides the two nostrils, and it usually, in some patients, we can see a columellar groove also at the in the basal view. Below the columella, the deepest point here is called the subnasal, and this point determines the nasolabial angle, which is another key determinant in the nasal airflow pattern. Coming to the basal view, the few structures that we can appreciate on the surface anatomy are, of course, the tip, which is the apex of the lobule, as I mentioned before. Just below the tip and above the columella is the infratip lobule. Infratip lobule, again, is an important part with respect to surface anatomy, because any flattening in this area leads to disharmonized tip aesthetics. Below this is the columella again. So columella divides the two nostrils. Sometimes one can also see a columellar groove in between due to prominent medial crura. Then on the either sides are the ala. Ala are basically the mobile lateral border of the nostrils. And they communicate with the base of the nose via this small interconnecting bridge of skin and soft tissue, which is called the sill. And this whole entire area where the alar inserts into the sill is called the alar base. So what are the basic components of the nose? So the nose basically consists of course, a cover, which consists of skin and soft tissue, the framework, which is mainly the bones and the cartilages, and to connect them are the support mechanisms that are the ligaments and the muscles. So coming to the skin and the superficial musculoaponeurotic system. So the skin of the nose consists of 5 distinct layers. The nasal soft tissue consists of 5 distinct layers. The first one being the skin. Skin consists of the epidermis and the dermis. Below that comes the subcutaneous fat. Below that is the musculoaponeurotic layer, which consists of mainly the muscles and the fascia. Below that is the deep areolar tissue, and below that is the deepest layer is the perichondrium or the periosteum, depending on which area we are talking about. Overlying the cartilages in the lower 2/3 and bone in the upper 1/3 of the nose, respectively. So here, what I would like to suggest about the applied anatomy of this layer is that any surgical disruption caused of the basically the venous and the lymphatic systems run above the musculoaponeurotic layer that you can see here in this diagram. So if you disrupt this layer while you are doing your dissection of an open or a closed approach rhinoplasty, you will encounter much more edema, which will settle after a very long time, which will of course cause unpredictable results. So one must always maintain a plane of dissection in this deep areolar tissue, which is just above the perichondrium or the periosteum. So this leads to a relatively avascular plane, and plus there is not so much of post-operative edema. So the skin thickness varies from top to bottom, as we see in this picture. So towards the radix area, near the nasal process of the frontal bone or the radix area, it is supposed to be the most thick part. Coming lower down, the skin and the aponeurotic system becomes thinner, and here it is much more mobile as compared to the lower part. As we come lower down, the skin becomes thicker, and one also encounters a lot of dense sebaceous glands in this area. So now in Indian subcontinent, how does this matter? Indian skin is usually considered to be quite forgiving as compared to Caucasian skin. Why? Because Caucasian skin is considered to be very thin, light colored. So even minimal of augmentation, reduction, or any grafts put in the tip or elsewhere show up much more prominently than in our Indian skin. But that also creates a limitation in our type of skin, wherein we need to do an aggressive technique or probably aggressive grafting to make any change little bit obvious. Because it is like a thin cover, or it is like a thick cover or a thick blanket put over a less prominent structure. So like you can see in this picture actually depicts Caucasian and ethnic African noses. So when you compare the two, you will see that the ethnic patients usually have quite a thick subcutaneous um, subcutaneous fat, and they have quite flimsy and thin cartilages, which makes it a little difficult or a little challenging to create a dynamic change in such kind of patients. The nostrils, of course, are quite wide. The dorsum or the base bony width here is also quite wide. So here, the few points that are important are, first is the plane of dissection. So in Caucasian skin, one must, Caucasian type of nose, or probably patients encountered in the north part of India, one has to be very meticulous about the plane of dissection, because you have a very thick skin envelope. If you go too much superficial, you might create a buttonhole in the skin. If you go quite deep, you have the risk of injuring the cartilages down below. So one must strictly adhere to the subperichondrial plane of dissection. Whereas in the south part of India, or probably more ethnic kind of noses, you can be a little liberal and probably dissect off a little bit of those deep areolar fatty tissue to reduce the thickness of the skin here. Now coming to the next point, that is technique selection. So in such kind of thin skin patients, one should be very careful and in selection of the technique. As in, you should use not very prominent grafts. Your graft should be very nicely contoured. They should have smooth edges, because any sharp edges or any uneven edges can be seen very prominently through thin, light-skinned patients. And whereas coming to the ethnic subpart of the patients, you need to be much more radical, much more robust with your underlying framework grafts. And of course, the main key is counseling of the patient, and you should be able to set realistic goals with your patient, explaining them clearly of what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved. And next, after the skin and subcutaneous tissue, comes the muscles. So I have tried not to include the extensive anatomy of the nose, but the relevant points with respect to rhinoplasty. So if we see regarding the muscles of the nose, there are 7 paired intrinsic and 3 paired extrinsic groups of muscles. Clinically, there are mainly 2 or 3 muscles which are important when we perform a rhinoplasty. First would be the depressor septi muscle. As you can see in this diagram, the depressor septi muscle is a vertically running muscle which is attached to the inferior part of the caudal border of the septum and goes down below into the orbicularis oris muscle. So what is the importance of this muscle? One should pre-operatively definitely observe in lateral view any drooping of the tip while facial animation. You ask the patient to smile in the lateral view, take a picture before smiling and after smiling. If there is a significant drooping of the tip down or shortening of the lip up, this means that there is an overactivity of the depressor septi muscle. In this case, what one should do is, while dissecting or exposure of the septum, one can just dissect off the fibers of the depressor septi muscle from the caudal border. Next muscle of importance is the levator levi alacinaceae. So this muscle is basically responsible for the alar flaring. So especially in the South Indian population, we've seen that this muscle is quite powerful. So in such cases, you should take a picture again before smiling and after smiling. Preferably a basal view would give a better appreciation of this aspect. And if there is excessive flaring, one has to probably consider an alloplasty. The next muscle is procerus. So procerus muscle is usually present in the upper part of the nose. It is just above the radix. It inserts. So while doing a dissection, sometimes there is some when you separate these muscles of the procerus to expose the dorsum. There is quite a lot of bleeding and oozing, so one has to probably keep a cold sponge here for some time to reduce the edema and the bleeding. And it also causes some kind of fullness in this area, soft tissue fullness in the radix area. So that is there, and also as in when we age, this procerus muscle becomes quite overactive and the skin becomes loose, and leads to some vertical lines in this area. So maybe a Botox or filler can help with such kind of deformity. Coming to the blood supply, so blood supply is mainly from the ophthalmic artery and the facial artery. The ophthalmic artery gives its terminal branch by the name of anterior ethmoidal artery, which exits the nasal dorsum and supplies the upper third of the nose. The other main supply is from the facial artery. The facial artery gives off its angular artery and the superior labial artery, which form an arcade of blood vessels and supply the lower 2/3 of the nose. The importance here is that we usually, when we give infiltration, we try to infiltrate some in this area as well, so that it causes some kind of vasoconstriction and gives us a better feel. Also, it was once considered that while giving the columellar incision, sometimes we might compromise these small columellar branches, but it is not so. One must not be scared of it. We often cauterize the vessels if they come in the way and cause a lot of bleeding also. But the nose has quite a lot of lateral rich supply from the angular artery and those arcades. So it does not compromise the blood supply of the tip. But definitely, if one is planning an alar base excision, especially in patients with clefts or asymmetric noses or facial asymmetry, the incision should be placed such that it does not go more than 2 millimeters superior to the alar groove, because this can definitely cause a compromise to the lateral blood supply. Next is the nerve supply. Nerve supply is mainly by the maxillary and the ophthalmic branches of the trigeminal nerve. So all our local anesthesia or block techniques, I usually perform all my surgeries, all my rhinoplasties under general anesthesia. But we definitely give a local infiltration for a better field and for post-operative pain management. So what I tend to do is I usually infiltrate the dorsum to block the external branches of the anterior ethmoidal nerve. I also give a supraorbital and an infraorbital block separately, injecting about 0.5 to 1 ml of 0.2% of ropivacaine with 0.2 ml of adrenaline to provide some vasoconstriction as well for a better feel. And one must have a thorough knowledge of the nerve supply of the nose to give a better post-operative analgesia to the patient. Now coming to the framework of the external nose. So framework of the external nose, as you can see in this picture, consists of the nasal bones, the frontal process of maxilla laterally, the cartilaginous vault, that is the two paired upper cartilages followed by the lower lateral cartilages and the dorsal septum. So this mainly mainly compromises of the framework of the external nose. Coming to the bony vault. So the bony vault is the principal structural base for the nose. It is generally pyramidal in shape and compromises of the upper 1/3 of the nose. It consists of two paired nasal bones, as you can see in this picture, which communicate with the frontal, with the nasal process of the frontal bone superiorly and frontal process of maxilla laterally. They support the upper nose and the upper lateral cartilages. The nasal bones articulate medially with each other by the internasal suture, and there is quite a significant overlap between the upper lateral cartilages and the nasal bones. It can vary up to 6 to 8 millimeter. This creates an additional support system to the middle 1/3 of the nose. Another terminology that we will frequently come across is the pyriform aperture. So what is this pyriform aperture? You can see in this diagram below that this is a triangular space formed by the nasal bones above and the frontal process of maxilla laterally. The premaxillary bone caudally, which in between or in the central part has a prominence called as the anterior nasal spine. So this whole entire structure is the pyriform aperture. Now, why is this important is that most of our lower part of lower two-third of the nose rests over this pyriform aperture, and it provides major support mechanisms to the nose. Now, the next structure in the that is important is the dorsal and lateral keystone area or K junction. What is this K junction? K junction is the confluence of the cartilaginous nasal septum, as you can see in this diagram. The small wedge-like extension of the septum that is underlying the nasal bone. These nasal bones have been dissected and removed to expose this part of the septum, which is underlying underlying the nasal bones. This can again vary up to 8 to 10 millimeters, depending on whether it is a male or a female or what kind of population we are dealing with. So this area is this junction is the dorsal K area or the dorsal K junction. It is formed by the cartilaginous nasal septum, the nasal bones, the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid. These three together form the dorsal K junction area. So this is the main, why it is called the keystone area is this is what is holding the nose up. This is what is holding the dorsum up. Any disruption in this area may be due to an over resection of a hump or maybe an inadvertent osteotomy can lead to disjunction in this area, and the nose collapses down. As you can see in this picture, the lower part of the nose has totally collapsed down due to an inadvertent disjunction at the K junction area. Next important area is the lateral K area. Lateral K area is formed by the overlap of the upper lateral cartilages below the nasal bones. This can vary up to 6 to 8 millimeters. And this area, if is disrupted due to any kind of injury or any kind of inadvertent lateral osteotomy, can lead to valve collapse, can lead to inverted V deformities, and so on and so forth. So one must be very careful while performing osteotomies. It should be along the frontal process of maxilla, as you can see here, and not the nasal bones. Why? Because if you do it along the nasal bones, you will end up creating a step deformity here, and it will be quite palpable. And you will not achieve a significant narrowing of the base bony width. So you should always stay along the frontal process of maxilla. If you see externally, this would roughly correspond to the nasofacial groove, which is formed here. The nasofacial groove, and if you go too much towards the base, that is posteriorly, if you go here, you will encounter a very thick bone, and it will be very difficult to perform an osteotomy. Whereas if you go very dorsally or anteriorly, you will encounter, you will create a step deformity or a rocker bottom deformity, where the whole segment that you have broken will become extremely mobile and move like a rocker bottom. So it will move up and down, and patient will be able to feel or palpate the step over there. So you should always stay along the frontal process of maxilla. Next important area in this bony vault is the Webster's triangle. So this is more important where if we are operating on patients from the north or Caucasian-like noses where they are very narrow already. What is this Webster's triangle is? It is a pyramidal shape of bone or a triangular shape of bone on the most caudal portion of the pyriform crest. It should not be incorporated in the osteotomy, because if you do so, the head of the inferior turbinate is attached here. So if you dislodge this particular piece of bone, the inferior turbinate will tend to go medially, causing even more obstruction in the airway. So one must be very careful if you are dealing with thin noses or narrow noses, not to disrupt this Webster's triangle area. Now coming lower below to the cartilaginous vault, the cartilaginous vault consists of the nasal septum, the upper lateral cartilages, and the lower lateral cartilages. As you can see in this picture, the bony vault or the nasal bones have been lifted up. What you can see below is the rectangular upper lateral cartilage, which has slight overlap with the nasal bones. Down below are the lower lateral cartilage. You can see the medial crest through the cut skin. Down below, again, this is the extension of the caudal septum that you can see below the K junction area, the upper lateral cartilages and the lower lateral cartilages. Coming to the upper lateral cartilages are paired rectangular cartilages which underlay the nasal bones cephalically. If you see at this interjunction, which roughly corresponds to the, corresponds to the K junction area, the dorsal K junction area. Here, the nasal bones, the septal cartilage, and the upper lateral cartilage are at a T-shaped configuration. As you come down below, the angle goes narrower, and at the junction of the caudal border of the upper lateral cartilage, it becomes quite narrow. And this area corresponds to the internal nasal valve. So all of us know that the internal nasal valve is the site of the highest nasal resistance. The boundaries of this internal nasal valve are medially the septum, laterally the upper lateral cartilage, and inferiorly the head of the inferior turbinate. So this angle normally for an ideal airway is considered to be 15 degrees. Anything less than 10 degrees will cause a significant feeling of obstruction to the patient. And one must be, even if the patient has not come to you for a rhinoplasty, even if the patient comes to you with a crooked septum, difficulty breathing, one must always see if there is any impaction, if there is a high dorsal deviation, or if there is any impaction in this area, because this will ultimately make a difference in your results. If you're not able to open this angle, no matter how good a septoplasty you have done down below, if the dorsal correction is not done, it is unlikely that the patient will be benefited from the surgery. So in this diagram, this small diagram here, this green line that you can see roughly corresponds to the area of the internal nasal valve. So many a times you encounter such kind of patients that they, while doing a deep inspiration, the entire lateral nasal wall collapses. So this particular gentleman has a deviation, has a gross deviation, because of which there is such kind of a collapse. This is an external and internal nasal wall, both have collapsed in such case. So this has to be identified pre-operatively. I'll be stressing more about such kind of things in the analysis, but just to give the importance of these walls, I have incorporated this picture. So coming to the lower cartilaginous vault, a lower cartilaginous vault is formed by the two paired lower lateral cartilages, or the alar cartilages, and the fibrofatty tissue adjacent to it. The sub areas of the lower cartilaginous vault are the tip, ala, columella, nostril, and vestibule. This lower cartilaginous vault is also called as the lobule. It is the lower 1/3 of the nose, and it is mobile. So coming to the alar cartilages, or the lower lateral cartilages, they are roughly divided into three parts. That is the lateral crust, the medial crust, and the middle crust. These alar cartilages are the main determinants of the shape of the tip. As you can see in this picture, medially you can see two parallel plates, which are the medial crust, followed by the middle crust, which is a little divergent and following the prominent part, that is the dome. And then starts the lateral crust, which is the largest part of the lower lateral cartilage. So coming to the lateral crust is this lateral large flange of cartilage, which forms the bulk of the lateral wall of the lower 1/3 of the nose. Now, what is the clinical significance of this is, while placing an infracartilaginous incision in an open rhinoplasty, one has to identify the lower or the cephalic border of this lower lateral cartilage, the lateral crust, and roughly 1 to 2 millimeter below that, you're supposed to place your incision. If you go too close to the cartilage while dissecting, you would be likely to injure the cartilage and cause some kind of deformity. So the identification of the lower margin of this is important. Next is any collapse of this alar rim can be corrected by placing alar rim grafts in this gap below the caudal border of the lower lateral cartilage and the alar rim. This gives quite a good triangular configuration to the alar base. As you can see, the anatomy of this lateral cartilage is so that as you go laterally, the lateral crust tends to migrate cephalically. So we have a gap out here. This is where our grafts are usually anchored. Any deflection in the anatomy of this lateral crust, be it convex or concave, creates a lot of difference in the nasal tip aesthetic. So one has to make sure that at the end of your surgery, you give symmetrical lower lateral cartilages for a good tip symmetry. Next is any bulbosity in the tip or any supratip fullness can be again corrected by doing a slight cephalic trim of these lateral crust. But one must always leave behind 7 to 10 millimeters of this lateral crust to avoid alar pinching. Coming to the next part, which is the intermediate or the middle crust, which roughly corresponds to this area in this diagram. So there are two parts of the middle crust. One is the lobular segment, this divergent part, and the other is the dome. So the dome is the main key determinant of the aesthetics of the nasal tip. So most tipplasty techniques modify the shape and position of this domal segment. So this domal divergence angle is mainly responsible for the tip aesthetics. Next important part of the lower lateral cartilage is the medial crust. The medial crusts are the two parallel plates of the lower lateral cartilage. It again consists of two parts, the columellar part and the foot plate segment. The foot plate segment is slightly divergent, whereas the columellar part is fairly parallel to each other. The foot plates support the nasal tip and determine the columellar width and the nostril shape. The angulation of the foot plate again determines the width of the columellar base. So if you can see any kind of flaring in this area, one can put a transfixation suture to control the flaring of the columellar base. And again, if you see any kind of bifurcation or divergence, one can also use suturing techniques to correct that. So coming to the next most important point are what are the tip support mechanisms? We've learned about the cartilages, we've learned about the muscles, but what is it that is exactly supporting the tip? So there are various fibrous attachments of the lower lateral cartilages to various surrounding structures, which majorly contribute to the tip support mechanisms. And one must always aim to restore these mechanisms to create the ideal and a more reliable result. So the lower lateral cartilages, as you can see in this diagram, are firmly attached through some fibrous attachments through this anterior septal angle anteriorly, the upper lateral cartilages, the piriform aperture laterally, the caudal septum, and the premaxilla. So these mainly provide support and determine the position of the tip. Next important area in the lobule or the lower 1/3 of the nose is the soft triangle area. So soft triangle area, the main problem with this area is that this particular triangular apex of skin has no cartilage, has no support below. So while doing our open rhinoplasty dissection, if one tends to injure the skin out here, this leads to severe scarring and notching and leads to unpleasant or unaesthetic results. And it is fairly irreversible. It needs major corrective techniques to overcome this deformity. So one should be very careful not to dissect in this area, not to cut this area, or not to injure the vestibular skin down here. Next important part is the septum. So we all know about the anatomy of the septum, that is a quadrangular cartilage which is supported behind by the perpendicular plate of ethmoid, below by the vomer, the anterior nasal spine, anteroinferiorly, and it communicates with the nasal bones when we come towards the dorsum. And this is what this is how the quadrangular septal cartilage is placed. But what is important here in rhinoplasty is its perichondrial layer. So that basically provides the majority of biomechanical strength to the septal lining. While dissection, one has to be very careful that the lining flaps containing both perichondrium and mucosa are stronger than flaps with either perichondrium or mucosa alone. So dissection in a subperichondrial plane to approach the septoplasty may lead to a stronger septal lining flap available for closure and thus reduce the risk for septal perforation. So mainly in this area where you can see inferiorly, where the septum digitates with the maxillary or palatine crest, is where there are crossed or interdigitating periosteal and perichondrial fibers. Here the dissection is a little bit tough, but if done successfully, it can significantly strengthen the biomechanical forces in this area to keep the septum straight post-operatively. So I've tried to keep it very crisp and short. And the nasal angles and various proportions I'll be discussing along with analysis of the nose. And this was it about anatomy.
Thank you, ma'am. It is like indeed a very like detailed anatomy about the for people who are interested in rhinoplasty. This will be really helpful for beginners and like for people who are already practicing also, and for postgraduates also. This will give a very good idea about how to deal with things and how to start with. Thank you very much, ma'am. And like in the next classes, we'll be going ahead with the next topic, and hope people understood like whatever you have told. And if they are having any queries, they can ask. I'm going to unmute all so they can ask you the questions.
Sure.
People can ask if there are any queries or any questions. I think people are not having any questions or queries. So hopefully they'll attend the next class and like we can go ahead, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow, ma'am.
Thank you.